Everybody, it's Christine again. I'm coming to you from the Rhoda Center in Teaneck, New Jersey, and continuing the spring session discussing flowers. So this week, while they're still out, I'm always excited about doing flowers that are presently growing, in our time frame here in the Northeast, especially in New Jersey. And there are a lot of magnolias that are still out. It depends on where you live. Yesterday I was in northern Bergen County, where it's a little cooler and farther away than where we are here in Teaneck. And a lot of magnolias are still in bloom. And now you'll see the other cherry trees are all out, and what's coming up next are the beautiful white and pink dogwoods. So keep those in mind in the coming weeks, as well as your lilacs, which usually come out the first week of May. So while we still have time, I must say that this year was a wonderful year for the magnolia tree around our area here. We didn't have that much rain in March and April, but we did have some really chilling temperatures, I think, most of March and surprisingly in April too. So again, a lot of the hybrid magnolias that we have today in the United States come from China, and a lot of American botanists have created hybrids to withstand the cold springs that we tend to have here. So again, the types of magnolia blossoms we're looking at right here are all kind of northeast and basically found in our area. And they can withstand these close to not zero, but freezing temperatures and make it into the spring. So again, up in the Northeast, unlike magnolias that are in the southern part of the states or in southern temperature zones, the southern trees have the leaves come out first, and the flowers usually follow. They may come out in the middle of summer, whereas here, all of these varieties and hybrids have the flowers bloom first, and then as they die off, now the leaves tend to come out as the temperatures start to warm. So we're in the last week of April right now, and it's been a crazy week of being freezing, wearing jackets and gloves Sunday, and now we're going up to 83 today. So this is how shifting and strong contrast we have attempts that these poor blooms and all these wonderful trees have to live with. All right, so I put an example of these are all magnolia blooms that you would see around here. Some of them, these almost look like dogwoods, but they're not. These are smaller, and again, these all come in different sizes and hybrids. The most common one is called the saucer magnolia, which kind of looks like this, and their petals are rounded, looking like spoons, versus the tulip magnolia variety, which has its petals coming to these sharper, more elongated petals into points like this. You can see the big difference of the pointy look on these versus these wonderful rounded spoon shapes. And then, of course, each of these flowers is slightly different from each other. There's numerous varieties and hybrids. I know Martha Stewart actually sells a lot of these. She's got a huge catalog. There must be 25 magnolia types that grow in all of New England, and a lot of them have fancy names. A lot of them are women's names. I remember Jane and Susan. I remember two of them, but you'll see. They also come in all white and even all yellow for the Northeast area. But the ones we find growing locally right here in Bergen County are usually more in this light icy pink color to a warm pink, and then we go into these wonderful kind of red violets, more of a deeper purple. Here's a deeper purple one over here. And again, the inside petals are quite different in color and value than the underside of the petals. So on all of these, you will find, looking into the flower and see that the interior surfaces of the petals are a beautiful porcelain, like an antique white you see here. It's not like a brilliant white. So again, for artists, colors of white, you've got titanium and zinc. This would be more in the titanium family, more of a warmer white. And again, I always put a little bit of Naples yellow, a little touch of permanent rose, and maybe just a small touch of a blue, maybe a cobalt blue, to create the shadow areas on this. It's kind of a mother of pearl porcelain look. So those are on the inside petals, which again, most of the inside of the petals are always cupped up. As they come to full bloom and all kind of pop out before they die off, they tend to flatten out and create like a saucer or a dish. So that's why a lot of these are just categorized as the saucer types, without getting into their formal hybrid names. All right, so the undersides are what kind of identify a lot of these, again, because the color's going to differ. Again, we've got much more subtle icy pinks versus a deeper, warmer, almost like a lipstick pink, which would be in the permanent rose family. And then we're getting into, again, here we have some translucency coming through. As thick as these petals are, light travels through them. So in some instances, you may see light that's coming from above. Let's say the light's coming in at 11 o'clock on this one here. So you see it illuminating some of the tips that are curled over at the top, but then light's traveling through them. And when you see these darker shadows, that's actually the shadows of the shapes of the petals on the opposite side of the flower, kind of casting their shadows on the inside of these outer petals that are closer to us. So you can see their translucency. So again, you usually find that like in the flowers we've been painting the last few weeks, with the tulips, the crocus, the daffodils, how as beautiful as they look and as opaque a color that they give off looking at them against a dark background, when you pull them up to the sky, you'll have light falling on some of the surfaces that are facing the sun, and some of those surfaces could be concave like this or convex like this. So again, as watercolorists or colored pencil artists, you want to leave the unpainted whites of your paper to fill up those highlighted surfaces, be them concave or convex. All right, so again, the difference between painting blooms off of trees versus cut flowers from the garden. These are blooms that are growing up on high trees, on branches, and we're only, as artists or lovers of flowers, we can only hope to reach the lower branches to either grab a shot of these or to actually cut some of them off. I will say I did cut some off. They did not last. They have such a thick woody stem. They're not a cutting flower. And we had a big storm just 2 days ago, a lot of high winds and some rain that really kind of damaged a lot of them. They're very gentle. So in any kind of wind or high rain actually caused bruising on them. So I didn't find any flowers left this week that were in this pure, clean state. To bring in that, it's kind of sad to bring in, damaged goods or flowers that have been hurt like this, and they just tend to brown because they're bruised. All right, so moving along, I just want to talk about how, as we're artists and we're studying what we're looking at. So if it's in the flower family, be it, a garden flower or a tree flower, we need to know how to recognize and pick up just the essence of the character trait of this particular species of flower and tree. So it's just a matter of studying. So again, up here I have a selection of isolated blooms. I'm concentrating on one bloom in this, they're close to the center. Maybe here's a more of a budding first stages of the bud opening up into the flower, where the sepals drop away from these little, here's like the sepal cases, these are all going to bloom. Some will bloom into leaves, some will bloom into other flowers. And then the flowers burst forth, and they have so many different stages as they open day to day. And the flower usually lasts close to 2 weeks if there's no storm to attack them, so that you do have a shot of going out and watching these, photographing them, maybe picking some to keep for posterity and for your inventory of wonderful shapes to paint, or during those cold winter months. All right, so we need to understand how they grow on the tree and how they bloom from bud to full bloom. So I would say most of the magnolia trees that I experienced walking around in my town I only found maybe 3 that were so low to the ground that I could actually photograph looking down into them or crouching down and getting a side shot. Most of these trees, even though they're not a large tree, they may grow as high as maybe 20 feet, 25 feet. There's some smaller varieties that almost look like shrubs. They're kind of like this big, the whole tree or bush. But their flowers, their blooms are smaller in shape. The trees have the bigger blooms as they grow and they mature. I know my aunt and uncle had a beautiful dogwoods and a magnolia on their corner. And that tree has gotten so high that I can't even photograph, but looking underneath like I would here at the underside of the blooms. And you'll experience that walking around in your towns or in your backyard if you're lucky enough to have some of these magnolias. So you're going to get different perspective vantage points of how you see them because of how the tree is growing, how old the tree is, and what we're left with as an artist's vantage point of just photographing these beautiful specimens. All right, so again, you have options of doing multiple flower heads, like you see here, like there's a cluster of them. These are probably, there are flowers that are this small. I'd say this is more in a life-size size. They're quite big, almost the size of a human hand. I'd say that if I was to put one in my hand, the outside petals could almost fill up and dangle over the width of a human hand. These are definitely blown out of proportion, and that's our artist's license to scale things up and kind of idealizing the shape of these beautiful magnolias. So we're taking them out of context, we're taking them out of being so realistic that it's now become selective realism, whereas an artist, we have the choice of eliminating things that we see that we photographed or we've studied, we looked at and observed a branch, and our eye was drawn to that one particular flower. So we may isolate and really stage the importance and focal point around that one flower that was so special and caught our eye, and place it in a major spot of importance, and then just bring in some other elements of the tree, a bud or some little dangling branches. Again, I always recommend when we're highlighting a portrait of one particular flower, is to bring some other pieces of shapes of different stages of that same flower species, if you can, within the rest of the composition. And to also incorporate some of the branches so we know how it grows on the tree or on the branch. And again, we have the license to move it any way we want to make a good composition. And then as we paint this subject, I love painting these yearly because we had such a great year. Last year they were not so great. I was so disappointed, and I wasn't excited about painting them. The trees all looked half empty, the buds weren't good, and then when they did come out, it was extremely cold and it was very windy. So it was not a good year for magnolias or the blooming trees. This year, just the opposite. So again, if it's a good year for photographing blooming trees, get out there and photograph them, because you never know what next year brings. So again, we're going back to an artist's license to eliminate. We can add things, we can eliminate shapes, eliminate branches, eliminate flowers. Selective realism, these are semi-realistic. These aren't like these botanical, type renderings that botanists need to make studies or observations of different species of plants. This is an artist, it's my interpretation. You could be looser than I am in interpreting the flower. And again, just how we arrange things so that there's a nice graceful rhythm and balance in all of these. And when I say balance, I don't mean that it's to be balanced and be so symmetrical. Flowers in nature are very asymmetrical. Things look more natural the more asymmetrical and kind of disorganized they are. It's kind of this Western philosophy of organizing things that we tend to maybe make things too centered or too straight or too evenly balanced with the positive and negative shapes that we put, in a canvas or a piece of paper. So I encourage you to think more asymmetrically and to eliminate a lot of things and enjoy the medium of watercolors, which I'll be doing a demo later, of how different and unique the experience of painting this particular flower with a wet into wet background of your choice is, because of the spontaneity of the medium versus painting in acrylic or painting in oils. So again, the character of most blooms, the translucency of these delicate flowers, that light travels through them, is also a wonderful add-on to using the medium of watercolors to describe this beautiful, magnificent flower. So just talking about varieties of backgrounds, and I think I did put up, I have one with no background, it's over here. So sometimes I'll sketch in. This was actually a flower, and there's actually a flower growing on the back side of this, so it has more petals than what you would think. Usually, if you count the petals on one of these flowers, I usually count 9, and 2 of the outer elongated petals are usually so different in shape than the interior petals. Usually the interior petals are a little fatter and rounded, and there's usually 2 or 3 of these outer petals. They were the first one on the outside of the bud. that kind of immerse and pop out when the interior petals come through. Are usually longer and thinner, and they usually dangle underneath this closed flower. So there's actually another flower behind this, but I started painting this and I said, you know, I just like the openness. I loved my negative shapes. I love the flow. I love this openness and crisscrossing a leaf with the branch here. This is actually just disconnected, but I just like the negatives. I love the energy of the negative space versus the positive space. It really allowed this to just, you know, bloom and just sit quietly to just really enjoy and study the shape. So I chose not to go in with the background. You can certainly do that with your paintings or with your ink drawings, or if you do some pastel sketches of these. Pastels is a nice time to just kind of put them on a tinted paper and you know, take advantage of working on a mid-value, working to your lights, painting a light flower on a medium mid-value background. Let me just put this over here. This is a little example of a pencil, just a colored pencil. So again, you can see how I plotted there are two branches, two similar stages. These are both blooms. Usually when you see a branch, you'll catch, I'd say most of the flowers on a branch are almost at the same stage of opening. And then as you move farther up, maybe you'll find some larger blooms. As the end of the branch starts to grow, you'll see some buds that haven't opened yet. But usually when you see a branch, I'd say like 8 out of 10, most of the flowers are almost at the same stage of growth. Here you can just see how I'm using some warm pinks, some cool pinks, some blues to shadow the interior, the inside white surfaces of the petals versus the underside, which are kind of a cooler purple. I would say in this family, this row over here, they're a little darker than these specimens up here. And again, I'm just creating some nice dark to mid values in my background for contrast, so that the minute I get darker than the values of my petals, it's going to bring and pop those flower shapes out. So again, I'm using the same principles of drawing, placement, designing that I do here, and how I'm thinking, and I'm just doing multiple strokes to build in some warm and cool yellow greens and cool blue greens in the background. I brought some of the purples from the underside of the petals in to mix with some greens to create some dark branches that are crisscrossing the background. And I just want to point out how I'm keeping my background shapes and open spaces very out of focus by not giving a lot of detail. I just left the detail for these two flowers, which are growing and existing in the same plane. So we've created a little illusion of distance by having soft edges, by having all of the information, my negative space, be cooler. Cool colors recede, dark, cool greens and blues and purples recede, and these warmer pinks and purples are now coming forward. So it's giving us a little depth of field, just using the medium colored pencils to capture, again, a beautiful northeastern magnolia. Okay, so I just want to talk about color and mood. So again, these are just, I just brought in some branches. These are silks, but they're not magnolias, but I just wanted to bring in this strong contrast. I thought the branch here was very similar to the magnolia tree. This is like a peach cherry, but again, the branch is very unique in that it grows like in segments, and it's pretty woody. So I'm going to draw a few things separately. So there's shapes that we'll be composing together. So I'm going to draw some things on how to draw them, but then to place them, that's something else, as to where we position them, how many we're going to put in, and how they're going to overlap. So again, I'm drawing with these dry markers. I may erase some of my lines as I draw a flower shape existing on top of a branch, because it's opaque, it's going to eliminate or seeing this dark branch, but I just want you to get the character of the branch and the wood. So again, I'm going to assume that most of the trees we're looking at, that most of my collection, my photographs over the years, I've tried to take some shots of looking down into them, or taking a side view like this, side view here, I'm looking down into it, versus looking up at these branches, which something like this. So this is pretty high up, so I'm looking up maybe at this angle up here, but it's a nice study of how these branches grow. And you can see they're going in and out of shadow and light. Here's sunlight falling on them. Usually they're a dark gray, but we're in the shadow, when they are in the shadow, I'm talking about the woody branches, in the shadow of all of these opaque flower heads, they create a lot of shadow and so the stronger dark contrast. As you see them, they're quite dark versus here's some highlights in there. So keep the fact that I would draw some highlights in to show the sunlight going in and out as the light's also doing the same on the flower heads. You can see how some of these flower heads, the leaves are just almost crushed either by a rainstorm or they're not perfect, but it was a nice example that day of capturing like the light on this branch, and you get a nice feel of those little segments or joints as you see the growth pattern of the branch. So again, when there's no buds out and you look at this tree in December, you can recognize a magnolia tree immediately because of the unusual structure of its branches and stems. All right, so in trying to capture that kind of a look, one thing you're going to say, am I going to have, I love diagonals, again, diagonals and forming obliques with a flower that's, even this flower is kind of a little asymmetrical. It certainly is round and has a lot of ellipses going on within it, but it's very imperfect. It's not tight like a rose or as perfect as a chrysanthemum, which chrysanthemums have a beautiful symmetry to them. These are very different, even though they're round elliptical. They have odd spaces in between the petals too. So the asymmetry is important in the personality of the flower to go along with the asymmetry of its branches. So just in studying like some of these branches, again, I would maybe do more than one. Depends on how many flower heads you want to put in. I'm going to use a light. This is a worn out gray like this. So if I place a few flower heads, so I want to draw an example of many flower heads that are at different stages of opening. I may look at some of my drawings and paintings and photos that I have here, but you'll get a good feeling of how to compose from beginning to end, and I'll probably do a lot more than you would choose to do at home. You may resort to saying, I'm not familiar with this flower, I'll do one or two, I'm not going to jump into a branch drawing 10 of these flowers, but as we move along, you'll get the feeling. So I always say, like, to study the flower and to look at them, you could certainly Google a lot of, there's so many like nursery and companies that sell these from China or they're grown in the States. You'll get some beautiful examples of photographs of the overall look of the tree. They're not large trees, but they're beautiful for like edging or you need a pop of color against a dark, solid green background in your yard or property. So you can get some unique shots off the internet for you to help you along if you are not able to go out and do some photography on your own and do some sketching in your local neighborhood. So again, the asymmetry of the branches. So again, if we're looking at, and usually we're going to be studying the flowers that are growing towards the tips of the branches. Guaranteed, the closer to the center of the tree, where the branches get thicker, the closer they get to the main trunk of the tree. So if you isolate and just look for the outer tips of the tree, you'll get a branch about this, and this is pretty realistic in size. That's a good size for the branch and a good size for the proportions of a magnolia, the saucer type magnolia. So if we were to have a long branch diagonally coming through, you'll have a couple branches. I'm going to just place a few circles, but let's say we'll put like a flower head over here, and you notice that it's an ellipse, it's kind of tilting at 11 o'clock. I may do, let's say when it's open, I'm going to put the center of the flower down over here. Maybe touching this, so this is going to overlap, let's say we have another flower that's maybe this shape, so it may be hidden partially by this one here, but it's a little smaller. Maybe up in here we'll have, again, a flower that's taking up, I'm just doing kind of like a soft triangular shape up here. And then down in here, maybe we'll have like some smaller, again, I'm just positioning these as one, maybe this is two, maybe we'll do another three over here. And maybe we'll have like some small buds going down there. So I've just placed a few different flower heads along here. I could add on to this easily. I can add a branch on. So what I want to do is I'm putting an area to say, I'm going to say, I don't want to start putting a leg down and start drawing a flower head. I certainly don't want to be drawing a dark branch through these. So I put a circular elliptical shape to save this, to tell myself, avoid drawing a branch through that, okay? So that your paper doesn't have to have that, erasable, stained look of your sketching of this, okay? So let's come in with some kind of branches. Let me just at some of these here. So I want to resort now to a darker black pen. So as we get farther up here, I'll get bolder. I need to do multiple strokes to get more of a thick stem shape coming through here. So this may be this thick, and then it may split off. This may be the central branch, and this is like a spin-off over here. Let's say we have like another. And as I'm drawing this, I'm like drawing in segments. I'll draw like 2 inches, and I'll start with like a little joint over here. Now this goes behind this flower. Maybe we'll continue it down here. So it's going to be that thicker main branch that's continuing here. And then I'll come back here and I'll suggest some of these little buds. And the buds could be leaves coming up, or if it's a flower head, I'll show you how it's going to have a more dramatic sepal coming up. So these are just like little joints, like a little fatter, where we have these like segments attached. And maybe this might interrupt it, and then so down here we'll, again, here's a little joint, so it's getting thinner here. But you can see how I'm staggering it with my marks as it's coming down. I'm trying to create the character and personality of the branch of this particular northern magnolia. So this is in black. Again, for those of you out there that have done any sumi painting, some of your pink, if you just use pink and a green ink with the black, you get some beautiful work on some watercolor paper. I may do, let's say, like a lighter, so let's say we come down, let's say we have another branch that's just kind of existing behind here. If I just do lighter pressure, so this branch is farther back, I'm not giving it that much importance, and I may dangle it from up here. I may put some flowers on there, but you see how just the value has changed? The lightness of the pressure that I put on this dry board, which is smooth. You'll be working in sketching on rough cold pressed paper, or even a Bristol vellum, or if you're working in pastels, you'll be working on a nice canson textured pastel paper, that you're just going to lighten up on your pressure. You go for a lighter value piece of chalk, or a lighter value gray pencil. And so let's say we may have some like branches. So I'm just creating like some diagonals that are in a lighter value. I'm trying to create that little, like how these joints kind of go to the right and left. And that's just not as important as this. If I was working in pastel, I would take my finger and probably blend this a little. So if I just tap it and disturb it with my finger, I can actually pick up some of this ink and create a softer look, which is, and the softer it is, it almost has a little out of focus look, as if it was moving in the wind. But it's become less important from my just picking up and disturbing some of that dried ink that went on. So it's less important in its reading, it's farther back, right behind this branch. We may come in with, so this is going down this way, this is going down this way. I want to create something that's maybe cutting through this way, so we're creating some interesting diagonals. So if you just put a line through this, maybe it's coming up like this. So I've introduced a third branch that still has a nice oblique, but it's counterbalancing. This is a strong movement coming down like this, and this is kind of taking a little more horizontal with a little curve over here. And again, so that was just a line, but you can come back and again draw like some little buds and some of these little fat joints. We can do an offshoot that kind of comes down here. But again, this is drawn not with the heaviness or darkness or value of that, but it's breaking up a nice space, and we really feel like now we're in a nice little section of the outer tips of this tree. Okay, now that was loose. That wasn't like a lot of detail. If I wanted to get into more detail, let's see. Let me come with some brown. All right, so we could introduce, let me see how dark this is. This is like a light brown. All right, so there are some leaves that are near that start to open up as these blooms happen. So there's some sepals. Let's say we do, these are like these little buds. If I bring in a little color over here, if I bring in a little color on top here. So we're introducing like some of these buds that are shooting out, but it's warming up that black. they're so big, I'm not even seeing how they're growing off the branch. But what I will do is pick up, now I'm really studying. I'm zooming in for picking up some distinct, specific information of how to transfer, let's say, this nice bud right here at the tip. So I'm going to come back, this is a light brown, and we have some little leaves at the base. So this was part of the sepals. I may come in with a little green. My greens are a little strong. Well, I can come back and calm them down with a little brown. And here is kind of roundish. And again, they have like almost like a little fuzz to them also, but I'm just trying to capture what's happening where we're going to plot this nice emerging bloom here that's at an early stage. Okay, so again, we're not going to see all of the petals as this is blooming, but I'm just drawing this in where there's one, there's this one kind of coming out, we're seeing a little one there, and then we're just seeing the tops like way back here. And I'm seeing like kind of one just kind of dangling out over there. So it's not a full bloom. And again, our light's coming in directly overhead as if it's like 12 o'clock. So you see how the whites at the tops of these are illuminated from the sun. That's against the strong dark blue sky. So this is just against the white board. If you want this to kind of pop out, I start to color these. And again, all of these leaves have a vein pattern that just run the length of them. So I'm just giving a basic local color of a nice warm pink here from this marker, and I'm just giving a local color. This is a petal that's dropped out. Remember, the outside of the petal has a tone, but the insides are really white. So that's just a nice pink, giving it a light tone, and we come in now with a darker shade. So again, I'm just going to use my hand. So the shape of this is to watch my upper fingers. I have nail polish on, so pretend my nail polish is white. So the sun is hitting the tops of these, and as you look under here, this is where it's darker. So it's the petals, and again, these petals are coming around, and they're also, there's a relationship between the petals. So they're pretty tight coming around. They're touching each other, but what I'm interested in, let's say we're gonna have this one overlap, we're gonna have, let's have this center one overlap that. So I'm gonna come in now, it's like a little darker pink. And I'm going to show how this is overlapping that. And then I'll come in with some solid color to darken the underside. Just to pop this out, again, I'm going to darken the underside that's kind of tucked in. So again, these outer petals are curving like this away, so they're convex. We're seeing the outside. I want to get another marker that has a little more value. And this may be a little too dark, but I'm going to come in with this. So I'm trying to find the broad side. So here we go. So this is getting a lot darker. I'm going to do some more strokes that are getting a little darker. So this is really dark, but for it to show up against this white board, I just need to come in with something that dark. And then I'll use this just for a little outlining, but we're just getting much darker, again, on the undersides of these. And the most important thing is to capture the identity of that opening magnolia. And it's a side view, it's not fully open, it's just starting to emerge, and yet we're seeing how it's growing on this branch. It's not such a tight rendering of this, but I'm certainly helping you just give the feel. And again, the looser my sketch, the looser your painting will be. And again, it depends on your personality. Some of you may love doing real tight botanical studies. That's wonderful. Everyone has a different personality, and I'm just showing you like the easiest, quickest way, and a little more spontaneity in the drawing. Again, I must say that there's such an elegance. Again, these are large flowers. These are tiny flowers. These flowers are much more important, a flower in size and shape for a blooming tree. These are very dainty, but they're all tight, packed together. And there's a lot of texture going on. There's certainly texture here, but again, we don't want to lose sight of the uniqueness of this flower. It's so different. It just looks like porcelain. It's so smooth and soft, a seamless look. Even though you can see a light vein pattern that's running vertically in there. So let's just move on down. So again, I'm looking at different examples here. This is like a nice example. So this one's kind of open. You can see the filaments on the inside. And the centers of the northern magnolias are so different than the southern magnolias, are much more exotic. They have a dome inside, almost looks like a blooming pineapple, which the northern variety doesn't. There's still a pistil. If you look at them, they're all the stamens and filaments on the outside, but it's almost like a little separate flower inside. Okay, so let's work on this large piece here, and then all of these will be smaller and less important. So again, I'm going to have this large one here, and I'll draw maybe part of this over here. So this is the more important one, but they're reading together as a continuum connecting shape over here. I'm going to draw again with this light pink. So again, I did an ellipse. You see my ellipse? This is marking the center of the flower. So if we're looking in the center, if I had this in my hand, this was the flower. If I was directly overhead, the center would be bullseye right in the middle, but we're not looking at it. I'm looking at a flower that's off like this, so it's foreshortened, and we're not seeing, so it's similar to this, we're only seeing the upper part of that center. So this is just yellow, and I'll put some filaments. You see my little tight repetitive strokes here. So again, if you're painting this with watercolors, you can put some cadmium yellow in the center, maybe with a 1/2-inch flat brush, do some vertical strokes, then take a smaller rigger to pull them up, or just put a mass of light yellow and darker yellow ochre at the bottom. Wait till it starts to dry, and you can actually scratch through that and get some highlighted filaments. But you need to get dark near the base. So this is like a nice light yellow, and let's come in at the base with a deeper orange. So again, my strokes are coming up, and I'm flicking them up so that as I flick them up, I pull away and they come to a point. And let's come to the base of that with some brown. And I think I have this is brown. So again, I'm just darkening down near the base. So now it's looking like we're looking down deep into that. And some of my petals, I may have to erase some of that. I may have put too much there, but let's draw. This is an open bloom that I'm looking at to my left, if you can't see it. It's similar to this. This is a line drawing, again, of two specimens on the same branches. There's some buds over here to the right. There's some little blooms, bud there, and some of these little leaves have started to come out. This flower is certainly more important than that one. You're seeing more of the center. And again, there's a branch connecting that, but there's a lot of line work suggesting the outer contour of the edges, separating each petal from each other. And then I have those thin vein patterns falling on the flower that if you were close up, you would actually see all of this. So let's see, I'm looking at this one right here where we're going to come out. I'm going to take my finger and kind of get rid of that thick line. This has a real flat tip to it, so it's giving me a thick outline. So this is the center flower petal, and we're going to draw another petal that's going to coming out over here. I'll take my finger, my fingers are erasing, I just need a damp. Okay, so I'm using, it's like a little wet paper towel that's erasing for me. So I'll just continue the line there. We'll have another petal kind of coming out over here, and that may interrupt this branch to its left. So again, I'm erasing my branch, drawing this petal over here. I also have a petal underneath that's kind of dropping out this way. And it's in the shaded shadow existing, except for the tip, like right over there. This is probably a little big. I'm just going to make this a little bigger. Okay, now we're moving around the back. So we've got this nice spoon-shaped petal coming out way up over there. I have this one coming up over there. And then we have one big tall one in the middle. So maybe I'll even have that kind of come behind that leaf up there. And there's another petal. This is definitely connected. There's another petal we're seeing just a little bit coming out over there. All right, so let me come in and see if this is a little darker. It's not. This is a light. All right, so there's a lot of blue. This is again a worn out marker that I say because it's giving me the lightest blue. It's almost like a gray shade. There's some lovely subtle shadow areas within this flower here.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's going to pick up on camera or not. So this is a blue, and again, if that blue mixes in, I actually picked up a little bit of the yellow, getting close to that. And if it mixes with the pink, it should make a gray. This has a little bit of shade on this tip over here. I just want to come a little more pink. So again, you may see a little bit of the underside on some of these, again, because the underside of these petals will either be in the pink family or a deep kind of violet color. We're seeing a little more, and you'll also get some bounce light from the underside of these. And then we have some shadow in here. This is where these all turn into the interior, this cup shape, because the center is kind of recessed. It's down and it's a little lower. So it's like a sunken, almost like a shot glass. Now this is, I have to be careful with the markers. Oh, this is going to, okay, here, this is a little more obvious. So we have a little bit of blue. I'm going to bring a little bit of blue near that center, a little bit of blue into the subtle shadows. So my blue marker picked up a little bit of that yellow and it's depositing a little green, but I don't mind. It's creating some grays. We have a little bit of shadow as these flip up and turn. And let's do a little bit of outlining just to pop this out. So we're going to have this. Just giving a little bit of a thin line, like a little darker fuchsia color. That helps separate the petals and helps you see, since we have this big white background, but you're seeing how that's growing and it's pretty full. And let's place one behind it that's not as important. So one have this is the top of this petal, and then we're seeing the underside over here. We have another petal that's like a spoon shape, so we're coming up, and it's all meeting right there. We may have a drop petal over here. Here's the center with our filaments. I'll come in, that was just like a tad yellow. I'll come with some orange, a heavy orange. We have orange sienna, that'd be great to put in at the base. I have to just deal with these simple browns that I have in these marker sets. So we're seeing a little less of the center there. We'll go back to drawing. So I'm going to miss some of this branch. It's going to be interrupting. So when I come to that, I'm just watching it. This has a nice big petal way up there. I'm going to take my wet towel and we're going to get rid of that branch that this petal overlapped so we can see it. And now we have another nice big petal that's kind of coming out over here, and we're seeing the back side of it also. So I want to, this is going to be the white, this is the white interior of the petals facing the inside of the cup. So our flower has passed over that branch. So that's why you don't want to put too much lead down to know where the placement of your flowers are. And the pink just picked up some of the black from that branch, and I'm using it for some shadow. So we'll put in some shadow here where This curves down into the center of the flower. This also curves down and takes a drop. So again, my pink felt tip markers picked up some of that black and it's giving me a nice kind of a soft gray in the pink family. There's a dropped petal kind of coming out all the way over here also. And now the undersides, I'm going to get a bolder, get a little more pink out of this. Just to kind of show what's happening. So we'll see a little bit of the underside here. We're going to see a little bit of the underside on this foreshortened view of this petal here. And we'll see a little bit of the underside just right over there. And this dark purple is just kind of outlining the separate petal shapes and how they're rotating around to form this particular flower shape. This is going to come under. We're going to see a little bit more of that spoon from underneath. This one's in shade and shadow. I'll come back with some blue. And maybe we'll put a little bit of brown down here and some black that we're seeing a little bit of a branch, an offshoot of this branch here. So this may follow through. I'm going to continue it over here. And maybe we'll put a green leaf or two, or suggest sepals that there's a bit of greenery underneath the bud right there. So these are two flowers. This was my influence over here. They're growing next to each other. I can come back and even this out. This was the side view of this one here. So again, if I come back with a little more purple in the first flower, I want it to be a little as important as that. So I'm doing a little bit of loose outlining. When I outline the flower, you could be doing the same. If you have a large area of white, like I have down here, you can come back with maybe a small number 4, number 6 round brush, and kind of loosely do a thick to thin outline to just help pop the light colored petals that are so on top of each other. They're overlapping each other, but on a white board or white background, they're lost. So we need a darker color. So again, as I draw, I'm holding this very loosely, and I'm trying to capture a little bit of delicacy and like a whimsical line here to kind of capture these petals as they're appearing in their relationships within the flower. This one's overlapping this, and this guy's kind of tucked in over here, and I'll just get darker down in here. I make it darker. Down here, definitely down over here. So I'm trying to make this as important as that. I got one very dark over there. I can even get a little darker over here in the center, bring some purple into the base of those filaments also. But so at least now they look a little more similar in the fashion of the colors I chose and all the light values and the mid values that I used to define those. Okay. Let me just do a couple other loose, maybe just outline drawings. So you saw how I'm logically working on shading these. I didn't come back with some blues, but you can certainly come back with some blues. So I wouldn't say that my shadowing is all finished in here. There's definitely some subtle values you could go back and enhance, leaving some of the white surfaces to what's happening with the sun naturally. So just to expedite things so I can have time to paint, let's just get I'll just draw these loosely, maybe without using paints. We'll just draw in purples, just to capture some other stages, some of the flowers. I'm just looking at this photo, so you could see the coloration. This was against, believe it or not, a dark tree. I remember taking this, I was waiting for some servicing in my car, and the place next door was a bank, and they had a blooming magnolia, and it was a small, had very kind of wimpy, thin branches, and the flowers weren't as bold and heavy as some of the other examples that I've painted up here. But this was one, it was all white. The flowers on this one bush were all white. And just look at how the petals that are facing upward are picking up the blue of the sky. And the underside, the color on here is actually, I can see yellows and browns and purples just coming up off the ground. So it's a white flower, and each petal has, you know, again, it's concave, it's convex, it's a spoon shape, and there's different surfaces within one petal that are either picking up pure sunlight or just the shadow of the sky. As you can see, pure sunlight, this is just picking up an angle of the sky away from the sun. So look at the range of values on that beautiful white flower. Almost looks like a group of white doves. Quite nice, and again, you can see these beautiful thin buds versus this one has those warm, this is a warm pink. So you would use your permanent rose, again, if you're using colored pencils or pastels. You'll have a selection of warm and cool reds and pinks. Again, you can put an underglaze of a soft Naples yellow down, or even pick up reflected green off the ground on the undersides of these petals too. All right, so let's just loosely start drawing some other flower shapes that we can fill in, again, for different stages of development. So if we put another one over here, see how much ink I have on this one here. So this one will place, I start with one petal, and then there's just a matter of relationships. There's usually 8 or 9. Sometimes you'll see 8, but there's 9, basically 9. And so there's always like 2 to 3 lower drop petals that are thinner, as I mentioned. So this is the outside petal. This is facing up. So it's the back side, which is colored. Now behind it, we're seeing the tops of petals that are on the other side of it that are facing away. So these are foreshortened as I come around. So the underside is a solid pink color, and the inside is white. And we'll have another, like one over here. And then let's say we have one that's shooting up, and it's open. So the inside is open here, but we're seeing the underside of this. So they look like the tip of a spoon. That looks just like a spoon. And then we're gonna have this one kind of coming out, and it's gonna be dropped like so. But we're gonna see this underside here where, again, look how my strokes are defining how this petal is coming out at us like this. So it's foreshortened, but just jutting out at us. The girls are doing a nice job. I'm impressed. We got Andrea and Zana here. They're drawing along with me. They're doing great. And let's have like a separate petal that's kind of shooting out and away. And it can actually be behind this branch. So I'm going to draw it with the branch in front of it. So there's another petal that's dropped, and maybe we'll have one behind there. So we're seeing like maybe a little bit of one that's like just right over here, and there's its side. So I've got some different shapes. Look at my right side of this bloom that's starting to open up. And it'll eventually open up and be as full as these two. But you can see how some of these petals in the front, these were outer petals that are now dropped down. So they're dropping down again, coming full foreshortened. This one's coming right towards us. This one's shooting off like at 3 o'clock. This one's over here facing 8 o'clock. So we're seeing a side view. We're seeing a little bit of the underside, similar to this. So again, you see the inside is white and the underside has that beautiful pink. So that's one, and let's just fill in a few more shapes here. So we're showing just a nice sequence of how these blooms grow on a branch, but now they start to overlap. So again, I'm looking at a couple of references here where I'll just fit in another one, let's say back here. So I'm going to stick with this hot pink. So this is a thin petal kind of sticking up. And this is going to be the back side of one. This is the underside of this one over here. This one's going to be a little open, so we're seeing that pure white of the inside of this petal over here. And then let's do the same here, where this is going to be the inside, the white's hitting this, and this is the underside over here. And then we're going to have like some back. These are just pure white. One may have a little bit here, and let's say we have another one over here that's white. And then we may have a petal that's kind of dropping. And it's going to be behind this branch. And then we'll connect it with, we'll get this branch kind of continue down over here. And again, if you bring in some of these buds, we can have some multiple buds around here, or some of the sepals that existed and maybe even interrupted. They're like they're standing up. at the base of that flower over there. All right, let's work on one back over here. I'm just going to draw the top of one way back here. So let's. So we're just seeing part of one that's pretty tightly closed, and it's going just behind this one here. We may have a little bit open branch here, and maybe one over there, but so we're just tucking one in. So this is certainly not as important as any of these. It may have a dropped petal over here. So these three are all touching, but we're only seeing a little bit of this. So this is the least important, but it's a nice way to connect these three. So it's creating a nice triangular grouping here. This is a triangular grouping here. But look how interesting my negative shapes, all of these negative shapes, give all of these a nice energy. And just to make this look at home, we can feed it down, like we'll create a branch that's kind of coming down, and we'll see it maybe just a little bit like under here. And then this is stopping here where we may continue this again off. Off over there, and then these were connected down over there. Let's just swing back up in here, and I have one facing up. So I'm going to draw this is almost like a tongue shape with the front petal just kind of drooping over, and we'll have one kind of come up and straight up here, and then we're going to have one kind of turning in, and I'm going to fit in a few back here. So that one, so this one's growing, again, it's on the same stem. These are all growing off that stem, and we may just add a little more information here where, as we get close to underneath, we're not seeing exactly how it's attached right there, but what we could do is I just put some brown, like a closed bud, and we can come back again, like with some leaf shapes that are coming out. Like so. So, okay, I think I've done enough on the board, but you get the feeling of how I compose this and how we're trying to make sense of how these grow naturally, and I'm giving a variety of stages of growth of the particular magnolia blossoms on this branch, the character of the branch, and again, I showed you how you can incorporate a little yellow and blues and pinks for that beautiful, soft, off antique white on the interior sides of the petals. And again, I just didn't get into all that shading here, just stuck with one color, just to show the formations and how I'm showing you, three different stages of growth over here. I can come back and do a little outline with just like a soft line here to show how some of these petals are just jumping out. I just want to define them a little better because it's kind of lost with that light pink. Okay? All right, so we'll take a little break, and I'm just going to set up to go do some painting. I'll be right back with you. Okay, welcome back. So I'm going to do a demo now, painting watercolors of two. I actually have parts of 3 blooms. So I have 2 that are open. We're seeing a little bit of that beautiful golden center with the filaments. And then we have the back side of one that's basically closed, is starting to open. So it's going to be a nice dark pink as a backdrop to highlight the open petals of this bloom that's in front of it. I think what I'm just going to do is remind myself. I'm going to show a little bit of this one here and a little bit of that edge over there. And then this is the back side, this is back, and maybe we'll do like the front over there. All right, so there'll be more like white areas, I think, than some of the pink. This is a smaller, we're just seeing part of a overlapped third flower. So we'll see the back side of the flower, so they'll have more color, like this. And that's what we're working towards there. And then, since these are going to be pretty light, I'm going to go pretty dark and very wet into it in my background. So there's a lot of painting to do. I don't have a lot of time. I'm going to use a large brush. So this will not be as detailed as some of the paintings I have on display over here, because of time's sake, but you'll get enough under your belt to how to proceed, changing now into this medium to capture the Magnolias and watercolor. All right, so since most of my petals are open face, I'm looking at the interiors, and those are more in the white, creamy white family. I'm actually going to show you a photograph. This was from a tree that was literally a block away from me and had some low branches that I was able to photograph these just on the sidewalk. So you can see some of the beautiful light off-whites on the open petals, and some of these have some pinks on the undersides here. So I'm going to go in to create kind of like that nice creamy white color. So I'm going to make a puddle in my clean, I just want to show you my clean mixing areas. Again, all my paints are very clean. Remember, paint the flowers, make sure the colors of your flowers are as clean as can be. Either use a very wet, big, loose sable brush to clean them off, or some people run them right under a cold faucet, very gently, and let them dry so you don't use too much paint. So I'm going to use a clean mixing area. I think what I'll do, I'm just looking at this particular flower, so I've got white, 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 white. So this is like a continuation. This is just plain water that I'm putting down. So by putting water down on the interior sides of the petals, which are going to be white, it's going to dilute anything. This also has the open area. This is going to be a darker white down in there. So that's just water. I'm going to come with a little bit of Naples yellow, and I'm going to dilute it in another puddle of water in my clean mixing area. So I just want just this lightest touch. This, this isn't yellow. And then if you don't have Naples yellow, you could use either very light tint of yellow ochre or raw sienna. Those two colors are interchangeable. Just remember, yellow ochre is more opaque and the raw sienna is more transparent. So that and a nice light wash would give you the same kind of warm light yellow. So I'm going to come in with that, and I'm going to feed it just near the center of the flower, because again, if there's a white, these are white petals, they're going to reflect some of the gold off of that hot yellow center where the filaments are. That would be reflected up into the white areas of those petals. I make it just a little touch darker. Remember, your watercolors are going to dry 30% lighter. So I just got a little darker. I came with a little bit of raw sienna, just getting closer to that center. I'm going to rinse out this large brush. I'm going to get just the lightest touch of pink, because even the interior petals, even though they're white, when they all come to the center, some of the formations of how each of those 9 petals are twisting and turning, they'll get a little bit of bounced pink off of the undersides of the petals. So I'm coming in, this is just permanent rose, or if you want to use rose madder genuine. And I'm popping in a little bit of that color also. And now all that's wet, I'm going to come back with a light blue. So just a little bit of yellow on light blue. So it's actually a light blue that Hold Line discontinued, but I love it. It's called Blue Gray. I'm going to feed that into the base. So what's happening here is that you have a yellow meeting a pink and a blue. When you have a little bit of the 3 primary colors, they're going to mix and create a gray. So I'm getting a nice kind of mother of pearl effect right there. While that dries, I'm going to jump over to this flower and do the same thing on all of my interior petals that are facing upward. So let's come back. I'm going to pre-wet my open white shapes. So I'm pre-wetting the interior faces of any petals that are looking up towards the sky, because the undersides of those petals will be pink, they won't be white. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to introduce either a little Naples yellow at first. Stay away from your cadmium yellows and your lemon yellows if you're doing a white area of the flower. Use something that's a little warmer and not as like neon eye-catching. Even if you have Aureolin yellow, just Aureolin yellow, I'll water that down also. So I'm just covering my tracks with what yellows you will have at home. That would suffice to give this kind of a little light, warm, golden, reflective color on the interior of these petals that are facing the center. So that's our yellow. Let's come back now. I have that little, a little puddle, and I'm diluting permanent rose into the tips of my of this large. This is a large number 16 sable. So it holds a lot of water, so very gentle. I'm feeding it in right near the base, the center, and then it's gonna just kind of bleed out. So we're just getting a little bit of color. We're gonna leave the rest white. And while that's wet, we're gonna come back with that blue-gray. So if you don't have blue-gray, you can use a little cerulean. I know if you go shopping online to Utrecht or Dig Blick, they have their own line of colors now, and I have I've been using their sky blue to replace my blue-gray since they're not manufacturing it anymore. So that blue-gray is now coming in and mixing with the yellow and the pink, and by the time I get to my last petal, my brush has picked up the yellow and pink on my brush that had blue, and it's already created a gray. Okay, so you can see very subtly the light values, but they're having a nice kind of mother of pearl sheen to them. Right now I'm looking at, this is the flower that's way in the back, and it's basically closed. I'm just going to feed a little bit of this mixture on these back petals that are facing towards us. That would be that opening area of the white side of the petal, and I'll just come back in with the yellow, the pink. And that's my last flower, which is hidden by the opening flower that's just in front of it, just seeing part of it. So I do have 3 parts of 3 flowers. I have a nice ovaly composition. I always recommend, I would say this is your main focal area, is this one here. Only because this flower is kind of bleeding out, and he's bleeding out on these 2 sides. And this is very strong because it's going to be contrasted against the beautiful pinks and purples on the back side of the flower growing next to it. And it's actually touching it. Again, think of your composition divided into 4 quadrants. So if I have my vertical axis here, my horizontal here, this flower is touching 3 of my 4 quadrants. This one's just in the upper left quadrant. I have some interesting negative shapes. If they look at my negative shapes in these 2 upper quadrants are quite different than what's happening down below. So chances are real good that we'll have a nice composition. So again, I have 2 flowers that are bleeding out. This it's like a third of the flower here. It's bleeding out. This one's bleeding out on 2 sides. This one's whole. We're seeing the entirety of that focal flower hitting 2/3 of your compositional 4 quadrants. All right, so now I'm just seeing where, again, because I worked with a large brush, this is starting to dry, but now we're going to come in and work on the undersides of the brushes. So this is the fun part where, well, let me see what brush I'm going to use for this. So we need like a basic wash and undertone. There's still a little bit of yellow. Again, a lot of these in the sunlight, it's a warm pink, so even the white part is almost looking like the lightest warm Naples yellow, little rose madder. So I'm actually going to pre-mix a little Naples yellow with some permanent rose here. We're going to just I may just get a little stronger than any of the colors that I've used up above. So this is going to be like a basic underwash. It's certainly not strong enough. So this is stronger than the values that I painted before. These 2 are touching here, so it doesn't matter. This one's kind of bleeding to that. So this is kind of a warm, peachy color, but I'm going to probably come back, and I'm going to leave just the top of it unpainted. I'm going to come back with a smaller brush. This is a similar sable, but it's a number 12. I'm going to come back with Opera. So Opera is your cold, hot neon pink. And I'm feeding it just, not a lot of water on this brush. I've downsized my brush, that's going to hold less water. And I'm just pushing the paint, feeding it to the hairs. Now, this particular cut of this brush, I can split the hairs like this, and they'll stay split. And I'm going to come in just to see how I do with this. I'm just feeding up some nice kind of vein patterns on the underside. And we have them kind of running the beautiful curve length of this spoon shape. It's the side view of this. I'm just taking the tip of the point of my brush here to just kind of delineate that brush. So you can see that's a nice cold Opera. That's really jumping out. I'm still painting. I'm going to go back in again. Let's get a little darker, and I'm going to take some cobalt blue. And little touch of ochre again. And we're gonna just come in and give a little more shade and shadow where we're getting tighter to the center. So again, and each of my strokes is taking the contour. You can press down on a pointed brush and get like the fat side. You can press down and get like a wide width of that brush, and then if you lift up, you'll get some narrow, thin lines like this. You can see how rich this color is. However, I don't have a lot of water on the brush. That's cobalt blue and ochre. So we got a little darker, and again, I'm gonna feed it, I'm gonna separate my hairs a little bit just to get that nice linear vein pattern, and we get a little more solid down near the base. I'm going to come back with a mixture of some cerulean. I still have that cobalt blue in my brush. This is a cerulean into the same brush, and maybe we'll just feed this in just right here, just get a little darker. There's a little more shadow, like just right there, and maybe just like right under there. So I'm going to come back and I'm going to pre-mix some Naples yellow again with my permanent rose. So we're getting this warm pink. I'm going to come back with a little bit of ochre. I'm getting just close to the, so near close as you get down to the center of the flower. Now you come back, I'm just going to come with some straight cobalt blue. Going to just feed up into that tip. And I like how strong that is. I may come back and just darken this a little more. This is another petal that's in between those two. I'm going to come back with some ochre and some cobalt blue. And again, I'm just going to darken where it tucks in near the center again. There's a little too much cobalt blue. Let's come back with some ochre, and we're just going to feed that up. A little touch. I had a little bit of bleeding on this where some of the areas have puddled and didn't dry so well for me. Let's just come in. This is the underside of this lower petal that's dropped down here. Come back with a little cobalt blue just to give it a dark shade and shadow right where it's tucked down near the other. Petals. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, well, these are still wet. I'm going to take the chiseled edge of one of my flat brushes, and I'm just going to go in and scratch out like a highlighted edge. So this petal is very close to, this is another petal just behind this. So we've got this petal over here that's jutting out. And I just want to delineate that this one is going to get a little darker purple, maybe going to permanent magenta. And we're just going to delineate the edge of this petal and the edge of that petal so we can actually see the distinct petals now. Okay, a little more ochre with a little touch of cobalt blue, and we're just going to come in here. So we're seeing a little bit of the side of this petal way back in here. And I'm going to just give a little, and we can go from thick to thin with your paintbrush there. So this is still wet over here. I would probably not work on this anymore, but jump over here, but I can do the filaments in the center. So again, I'm rinsing out my brush and my dirty water, go into your clean water, and I'm going to come back with some cadmium yellow, and I switched over to my calligraphy brush. So my center, it almost looks like a pineapple, the way I've drawn my little filaments, but in my drawing, it doesn't really matter. I didn't have to draw that much detail because it's not going to matter when to go in the paint. So that's cad yellow. Let's come in right underneath that with some yellow ochre. We're going to feed this in. I have a little too much water in this area, So I'm kind of mopping it up with a thirsty brush so it doesn't bleed into my pinks. Let's come back with some burnt sienna. And again, it's really wet. It's like the bases of all these flowers are kind of like bleeding up into that. I'm a little leery. I'm just gonna let that calm down a bit. And let's jump over to this other flower. So here's a little more Naples yellow with a touch of permanent rose that I pre-mixed. And we're going to be painting, this is the underside. This particular petal is just kind of jutting out like this, like a hook. You could hang your towel on. And notice how my strokes are just taking the contour of that beautiful curve of that flower, of that petal. I'm going to come back with ochre and not a lot of water in my brush. I'm just feeding it to the base so we get that cool pink going to the warm pink up at the top. I rinse out my brush, dry it off on my towels, and I'm going to come back with a little cerulean blue, not a lot of water in my brush. Again, I'm going to split the hairs of this calligraphy brush. It's a round synthetic, and I'm going to come up with, it's going to be a nice blue shadow, but I'm also taking the vein patterns as I come in with just a few hairs that are separated there. Let's come back with a little Naples yellow and some permanent rose again, and we'll start feeding in some of the other colors here. We have this edge here. I'm going to come back with a little permanent magenta and ochre, and we're just going to darken. This petal is behind the forward petal that's kind of protruding out at us. I'm going to rinse that brush out. Let's come in with some cerulean blue. So this is certainly cooling down this tight area where this one petal is kind of twisting and turning out to the left. We'll come back with that cerulean blue. This is still wet, but it's calmed down. We're just going to darken this right here. And let's come in with, let's say, some permanent magenta. It's going to be much darker. So it's where these three petals kind of meet. And I just got very dark, just like right in there. So I kind of lost that nice value over here. So I'm going to come back with some permanent magenta back in this area here. This is calmed down. Again, we had the filaments kind of bleed into this petal here. So I'm just pressing down, getting the fat broad side of my brush to just do that dark underside. We'll do a dark underside right there, and maybe a dark underside over here. This is that nice mix of, again, Naples with some permanent rose. I'm going to come back with some ochre. So the ochre is going to cool down the lower part. And let's come back with some cerulean blue. Not a lot of water in my brush. Here's the side of this petal is just curved. We're seeing a total side profile of this one here. So that was my warm pink, and let's come back with some cerulean blue, just on the tip of my brush here, just to darken that lower part of the flower. I'm going to try scratching out again over here on that last petal that I did over yonder here, and we're just going to scratch out like a highlight over there. Maybe do a highlight just right at the edge there. Lifting out my highlight here and a highlight over there. So it just helped to delineate. This is very wet right over here. I'm just going to take a small, thirsty brush and just kind of sop up that paint so that doesn't puddle in. Let's see. All right, so we have, I'm looking here. I'm going to a smaller brush now. This is, again, that permanent rose, the little Naples yellow, and I'm going to paint, I'm seeing a little bit of the side view, the underside of this petal right here. And we're seeing the same thing here and over there. And let's just show some over here. This is just a very thin, lost and found line that this is just delineating the edge of that. So now you can actually see the flower shape there. And let's come back with some permanent magenta right here near this. It's getting close to the base or center of the flower there. A little bit over here. This is kind of tucked in tight over there. So getting a little more dramatic contrast, getting it with a darker purplish red. And let's go back and do the filaments that are shown here. So I'm just going to put some cadmium yellow at the top of these. And again, it looks like a pineapple or like a cascading fountain. At the top, let's come in with some cadmium orange over here and over here. So it starts to get a little darker and hotter in color near the base. And then we can come back with a nice dark brown, or I'll try some burnt sienna. Coming back with a little bit of like a Van Dyke brown. So again, you have the option of going in and painting those very tediously at the end, or I'm just putting in a shot of color there. Okay, so now I'm going to get a nice larger puddle. I just want to capture the, so we're seeing a lot of the back side of this flower over here. Two sepals. So this is a back of this petal here. This is the back of this petal here. We're seeing a little bit of the side here, there. I'm going to come back with some opera and a little permanent magenta, and I'm just going to feed it into the base of these with upward strokes. And maybe just using the tip of this just to darken it a touch to get the tips of these a little more pronounced. Smaller brush, let's just come up with a little cerulean blue. Okay, so I'm going into some burnt sienna, and I just want to paint this branch. I may not have time to finish this, but I'm painting this branch. So it's just a burnt sienna, and so we're showing burnt sienna there. You can come back with the dark ultramarine blue and just come in just underneath that, and the blue is going to mix with the brown and almost create like a nice, interesting darker black. I'm going to actually mix a little yellow ochre like with the light green. If you got cabby blue pale, or sap green is good. Sap green and some yellow ochre. Yeah, we told her she did 3 minutes. Okay, and now we're going to, I'm just painting like a couple of these greenish buds. All right, so you can see how these are coming along. There's actually a little bit of nice warmth. I'm going to just do an area of some wet and sweat in the background. As this is starting to dry, I'm going to just scratch out a nice too wet. I'm trying to scratch out just like a separating line between those two. Let's see, so I'm going to take a flat brush, and I'm going to take, let's say we'll take a lemon yellow. So this is just like an undercolor. So lemon yellow is a cool yellow, and it's, I would just like work in an area where I can work wet into wet, just in this upper area, so I can show you I can finish off the whole background any darker. So let's say we go into cerulean blue over here, and I come back with a light yellow green. Those are actually petals. So I can feed that light yellow green in a few spots. And I'm going to mix a dark green. Let's take a dark green with a red. So let's say we get the hooker's green. And I'm going to go into a little permanent magenta with the hooker's green to get a dark green. And this is quite wet, so we're just going to go in to kind of fill in something that looks like out of focus greenery from the garden or trees existing behind here. And I'm not filling this in all evenly, it's very uneven. Let's get a dark brown. So while this is wet, I could actually feed in, let's say, a floating branch. So this is at an angle going like this. Maybe I have an angle kind of coming in and taking off like this. So this branch is going in while this is, your background's very wet. But what it's doing is giving the illusion of a beautiful depth of field that, again, this is all flat if you leave it unpainted. I'm showing you how you can paint in an easy wet into wet background with greenery from your garden. Or, again, that's going to be greenery from other trees that are bloom that are growing nearby. But I'm putting in that branch while it's wet, so that's looking out of focus and it's giving us a nice depth of field. So we're creating some distance here. This is quite dark over here, so I would come in very light with a light value. If these are white, then go with the mid to dark value so it really pops out. These are dark, stay very light in your value over here so that it doesn't compete. This branch is still wet. But I'm just showing you how I'm coming at the lighter warm yellow green down here so that the flower, the undersides of the flower are darker in contrast to that. Again, this is very wet, it would run, and again, I would wait to do this, but I'm doing just a few things just to show you how you would proceed in finishing this background since I don't have the time, but you're getting the general idea. How are we doing on time? We're good? Okay. All right, so that's all I'm going to do with this painting today. I would certainly, pay a little more attention to it, but you certainly got enough of a basic as to the contouring strokes, some nice, your choice of warm and cool pinks. My center's still quite wet. You could come in and scratch out some filaments, which I didn't do on this here. I was waiting for it to calm down. They're kind of pooling here. So again, when you scratch out, you want to have them just lose the shine. So you can see how I was able to scratch out a few textures there with these like kind of striated strokes that are really looking like the filaments. And again, I like to introduce some blues. Cerulean is a warm blue, cobalt a cold blue. They mix in well with your cool reds, which we use permanent rose, opera, and permanent magenta. And they'll give you some nice color and a nice variety of violets on the undersides of your petals. And then you saw a little wet into wet, out of focus background treatment, again with putting some of those branches in while your background's wet. And not a lot of water on your brush to get this out of focus branch with a nice look of distance. So I hope that helped, and you can continue, and I hope you do a great job on the finish of your Magnolia branch today. And stay well, and be looking out for the month of May's beautiful lilacs, peonies, and irises, which are lovely to photograph, draw, and paint. And I'll see you next time.